All right, next up we have Caitlin Kelly from South Pole talking about unlocking carbon market potential.
Hi, everyone. First, can you hear me okay? Okay, great. I just want to kick off with a huge thank you to Kathleen, to USBI, and everyone in the room who has helped make this such a phenomenal conference. So thank you so much for having us. My name's Caitlin Kelly. I'm the Senior Manager of Climate Projects for the US and Canada at South Pole. And I want to talk today about, unlocking carbon market potential and some of the key considerations as biochar producers that you might want to start thinking about as you try to wrap your minds around this increasingly complex space. So for those of you who aren't familiar with South Pole, we were founded in 2006 as a carbon project developer. We're one of the oldest and best established carbon project developers in the world. At this point, we've worked on more than 850 projects in over 50 countries. So while we have experience across a wide variety of project types, we're also deeply committed to innovation, which is one of the reasons we've been so active in the biochar space. We're really passionate about unlocking carbon financing for new communities and in new project areas. We also sit at a very unique nexus in the market. We have our project development side, which is the side that I sit on, but our climate solutions side of the business works directly with corporate clients to help reduce the emissions from their carbon footprints, and that puts us at a very strong advantage to help connect that supply with demand and help our project partners leverage and retail those carbon credits through our clients' portfolio. So as I mentioned, we've been very active in the biochar space. We helped launch the next-gen carbon dioxide removal facility, mobilizing 300 to 800 million of private capital to help rapidly scale high-quality carbon dioxide removals, including biochar. We're also a biochar credit retailer. We were a co-lead author on Vera's biochar methodology that was released, I think, during this conference about 2 years ago. We also sit on Climate Action Reserve's Biochar Protocol Working Group, so we're anxiously awaiting the finalization of that methodology, as well as working with biochar producers around the world to help build our own portfolio of biochar projects. So what's really exciting about presenting at this conference is that I don't have to explain to anyone what biochar actually is. So we can just dive right into the good stuff. I'm sure everyone is familiar with the carbon credit principle, but just as a very quick recap, if you are engaging in a project activity where you have a carbon dioxide reduction or removal, once that removal is measured and verified under an applicable standard, you can be issued a carbon credit for that project activity. 1 ton of carbon dioxide or carbon dioxide equivalent equals 1 carbon credit, which is essentially a certificate that can be traded on the open market, purchased by companies, which helps drive financing back into that project. While there are a wide variety of carbon markets, and South Pole is active in many of them, for the purposes of this presentation today, we're talking exclusively about the voluntary carbon market. I get this question a lot. 3 Degrees had this in their presentation earlier. I do want to strongly preface this slide with the fact that every project has its own calculation. So your project design, your setup, your temperature, your feedstock, all of that is going to impact this equation, but as a very general thumbsuck baseline number, you can generally expect 1.5 to 2.5 credits for every ton of biochar. So when you are producing biochar, there are a lot of different actors in this space. You have someone generally producing biochar. They may be selling to a kind of a middleman or a retailer who's mixing that biochar into compost, who's selling to a farmer, in a soil application example, who's applying that biochar into the soil. Depending on your carbon pathway, the ability to produce a carbon credit can sit with anyone in this ecosystem as long as there is a clear contractual language designating who owns the carbon rights for that biochar. So for example, if you're producing and you're retailing to a farmer, there needs to be somewhere in writing it needs to specify that you will be claiming the carbon credits for that end use. But just because you have the right to produce a carbon credit doesn't necessarily mean that you're eligible to. So in order to move forward with a carbon project, you need to be eligible under an applicable standard or methodology. South Pole, we're a strong supporter of ICROA, which is the International Carbon Reduction and Offset Alliance, which is essentially a seal of approval that they review various standards and make sure that they are upholding these key principles and developing the highest quality carbon projects. So Some of the things that have to be satisfied in order to meet this standard is that obviously any carbon reduction or removal needs to be real. It needs to actually have taken place. It needs to be additional, and in terms of additionality, it needs to be over and above any regulatory requirements. It also, depending on your approach, needs to meet additional financial additionality requirements to show that that carbon financing is really instrumental in allowing this project to occur. Any reduction or removal also needs to be measurable. You need to be able to say how much carbon you've actually either reduced or, in this case, removed from the system, and that needs to be verifiable by an independent third party. When we talk about permanence in this space, we're generally talking about at least 100 years. That's usually the standard's requirement. So permanent on at least a scale of 100 years. And carbon credits also obviously have to be unique. Once that carbon credit is issued, it's attached to a specific amount of carbon removal. And once the corporate client purchases that certificate, then it's removed from the system. It's retired. It can't be reused or double counted anywhere. So when we talk about ICROA accredited protocols, and as we've heard, throughout this week, there are a variety of different options available. South Pole, we focus exclusively on ICROA endorsed methodologies. So for us, there are currently 2 examples currently available, either Vera or Puro. Or I didn't include Climate Action Reserve in more detail here because that methodology hasn't quite been finalized yet, but we're anxiously awaiting that hopefully in the next month or so. But there are really 2 key options available now that if you're looking for an ICROA accredited pathway that you have to choose from. Both of them have different considerations, both from the project development side and an operational side, as well as carbon market considerations from the actual retail of the sale of the credits. So for example, Vera is a leading international carbon standard. When you talk about traditional carbon credit buyers, they are much more familiar with Vera as a standard. These are typically, from groups who have been in the sustainability world for a while. They're purchasing, avoidance credits, REDS projects, or MBS clients. Vera just has better brand name recognition with them. They've been ICROA accredited for a long time. Puro is a more innovative and disruptive carbon standard for carbon credit buyers who are looking specifically at CDRs. They're familiar with Puro, but it's just a very different clientele between the 2 standards, is at least some of what we're seeing from our clients. Puro just gained their ICROA accreditation last year, which is a huge achievement, but yeah, there definitely is different market recognition between the 2 brands. Puro kind of launched this space. They released the first biochar methodology that was available, which focuses on kind of lean reporting requirements. They have an LCA-based approach. Vera built on that progress. They took a bit of a step back and have more robust reporting requirements across kind of the 3 project stages from feedstock, biochar production, and the end use. And they were the first ICROA endorsed standard that was released on the market. Another key consideration between the 2 in terms of operations is the difference in issuance. So under Vera, you're looking at an annual issuance of carbon credits. Now, sales can happen at any time, but for the standard to actually approve the release of credits, that's only going to happen once per year. Puro, you can do that much more frequently, monthly, if you so choose. So it allows a much more frequent flow of carbon credits. Under Vera, you also only have waste biomass eligible, whereas Puro, it can be purpose grown, it just needs to be sustainably sourced. So these are just a couple of the different options. Once you have a strong kind of project design and you have a project flow, you can start tackling, which pathway makes the most sense for you. A lot of the work that my team is seeing right now is requests from biochar producers who are saying, okay, well, which is the best option for me? Am I eligible under both? Do I get the same credit yield under both options? It's just slightly different. It's just different pathways to get to this where you want to go. Another question that I frequently get is, when should I start approaching a carbon project developer? Generally, the answer is as early as possible, but I think one of the best things to have in place is a firm understanding across those 3 key phases of the project, starting with the sourcing of the biomass. Where is your feedstock coming from? What feedstock are you using? How long will it be available? Biochar production, what is your technological solution? Knowing what technology you're going to be using, is it high temperature? And also the biochar application and utilization and the end use of the biochar. This is often a later consideration. People tend to get very focused on the technology, and they're not as worried about the offtake as the biochar. But we've had a number of conversations just this week about how that can be a really challenging step, and making sure that you have a market secured for that end use, that it's going to be an eligible end use, and just knowing that there's going to be a market and that your business model accounts for that is a super important step in this process. So once you have a really good understanding of exactly how you want to tackle each of these 3 stages, it's a great time to reach out or then try to decide which carbon pathway is going to make the most sense for you under which standard and methodology. So once you when you talk, so there are differences in this process between Verra and Puro. Puro has a much faster registration process. Verra takes a bit more of a traditional approach. It can have longer timelines, but the general process flow of developing a biochar project is very similar. So you start with that project description. Under Verra's protocol, it's called a project design document, where you outline all of the information about the project. You run through the calculations of how you acquired your numbers, how you satisfy all the eligibility requirements, and basically that report goes out to an independent third-party auditor who performs a validation. That validation report and the PDD go back to the standard. The standard approves it, and then your project is formally registered, and you can begin the crediting period. During that time, you're also going to be working on a monitoring plan, so you'll be clear about the data that you need to collect in order to satisfy the verification requirements. You'll then spend, whether it's a month under Puro or a year under Verra, or whatever time you designate for your project, you'll be collecting that data. That data will then go into a verification report. That verification report will go out to a third-party auditor who will verify that the information is correct, that those carbon removals have taken place. That package will go back to the standard, and they will, once approved, they will issue those credits. So we could spend an entire workshop just on these steps alone, and there are tiny differences, but at least then as a general process flow, those are the steps that you can expect. Because there are so many steps in this process, there are also a lot of different roles and responsibility. This graph can look completely different depending on your own particular project setup and your contractual relationships. This is just one example of the most typical model that kind of we see to help establish whose roles and responsibilities are how they're being coordinated across this process. So often as a biochar producer, you may be the project owner, you may be working with a landowner, or those entities may be one and the same. It can vary, but the landowner and the project owner will be working together on data collection and providing that monitoring data that's going to be needed to verify your emissions or emission removals. In this case, if you are working with a project developer, you're generally coordinating with them, and they're helping managing relationships across the rest of the ecosystem. So hiring the third-party auditor, taking care of the validation and the verification, coordinating directly with the standard to make sure that the registration process is moving smoothly and efficiently. And then in South Pole's case, we wear multiple hats, so we're both the project developer and the credit retailer. You may be directly retailing the credits yourselves. Again, there are a wide variety of different options, but in this case, it's one and the same. And once the credits are issued, you'd be working with a credit retailer who's then selling your credits into the market to end buyers who then retire those credits. So I also wanted to take a minute to talk a little bit about some of the carbon market dynamics that we're seeing. Starting off with probably the most famous graph, which is Puro's tracking of the biochar prices. Historically, we've seen biochar sell from anywhere generally between $90 to $170 per credit. But I do want to stress that this is a very thin market, particularly when looking at the amount of production and carbon credits that we expect to be coming online. This kind of short-term volatility is exactly what we would expect. Trove Research was reporting at the end of last year, average price for biochar is about $175 a ton. We're seeing here closer to $130, $140. But I wanted to take a step back from the specific biochar mechanics and talk a little bit about how this fits into the broader carbon market as a whole, where we have much more data and some differing trends. So when we talk about market demand, 2021 was an absolute knockout, blowout year. The carbon market just completely took off, probably beyond anyone's expectations. And since then, there have been some reports of a market contraction or a market slowdown. I do want to specify that 2023, the last row of data that you see here, that's only 6 months of data. That's not a full year. So it didn't actually reduce that much. We expect 2023 to track 2022 pretty much very closely. And so there has been a slight reduction in the market and in the number of retirements since 2021. But as you can see, if you take, so if you consider 2023 to be doubled, if that was a full year's worth of data, we're still far and away above our 5-year average. So while there was a slight contraction after 2021, we're still very much on trend for long-term growth, and you are still seeing really strong signals for the market as a whole. Some of that decline or a slightly slower pace of retirements has been due to a lot of factors. Some of those are macroeconomic. We've also had a lot of questions about quality recently. We're seeing an increased bifurcation in the market between high quality and lower quality projects. We've also seen an explosion of rating agencies over the past couple of years. A lot of those agencies don't necessarily publish or report exactly how they're measuring projects. And as you get a wealth of clients moving into this space looking for credits, it can create a little bit of confusion. So there are key market mechanisms that are working on that, ICVCM, the core carbon principles, to help kind of restore and build more trust and credibility within the market. And we do, again, see those signs for long-term growth. One of the reasons that we're so positive about that is because of the claims that corporate companies continue to make. While people have been talking about a kind of a slowdown of the market since 2021, we've also seen a 500% increase in corporate clients setting science-based targets. Many of those are net zero claims, and a lot of them are going to require removals and increasing supply of removal credits in order to satisfy those targets. So looking at the valuation of the market, this is a market that's grown 500% since 2019. We continue to see strong signs of long-term growth. Bloomberg is reporting that by 2037, this could be valued at a $1 trillion market. And I think with the increased demand that we're seeing for removals and removal credits, that biochar has a phenomenal opportunity to be part of this incredible growth. So. Thank you so much. I'm super excited that I made through all of that on time. Oh, thanks. Yeah, so thank you everyone so much for your attention.
Well, I'll ask the first question if you don't mind. In your view, what is a high quality versus a low quality?
Yeah. How much time do you have? So there are, high quality can be benchmarked in a lot of different ways. And I think some of the challenges that the market is seeing now is trying to compare a biochar project in California with a community-based water filter project in Thailand. I mean, you're looking at, it's wonderful that carbon credits are now being accessible across so many different project types, but it also makes defining things like quality increasingly difficult. So I think, some of the things that we look for in turn, do you mean generally or also specifically in terms of biochar? We focus on ICROA accredited standards. That's also most of our clients, that's what they're looking for and what they're required to purchase to satisfy their targets. And we have we have due diligence incorporated in multiple layers of our organization. We have entire due diligence teams. We have a risk analysis team just strictly focused on each project type comes with a whole set of criteria that we use to define whether or not that project can be considered high quality. For biochar specifically, we're looking for high-tech, high-temperature pyrolysis type projects, good geographies, and strong co-benefits. The other big change that we've seen in the market is that buyers are getting increasingly better educated, and they want to know so much more about the projects. They're asking questions that a couple years ago we never would have heard, and they wouldn't have even thought to ask. And now they really want to drill down. They want to know the people behind the projects and what's actually happening on the ground. So I think that's a big shift that we're seeing in the market, and some of that comes with translating what's happening on the ground to corporate clients with an understanding that that audience has shifted a bit, and we need to be better about clarifying things, communicating, and really helping them understand the information that they want to know.
Hi, My name is John. I make bamboo toothbrushes, and I'm thinking about developing bamboo biochar projects in places like Thailand, in the Philippines, where we source our bamboo from. It seems like there are organizations like South Pole that work with potential project developers like us and provide services throughout the whole process. Who do you see as South Pole's competitors, and what are some key similarities and differences?
Absolutely, it's a great question. I think our kind of direct competitors change. South Pole, we have a presence in over 30 countries right now. So our kind of competitors, as you would call them, change a lot depending on geography, depending on project type. But generally, we're an extremely collaborative organization. We work closely. Yeah, hi, 3 degrees. So I think you have different carbon project developers operating across the spectrum. I'm not honestly sure in Southeast Asia who our direct counterparts would be. I can't necessarily speak to that, but I can speak to some of the things that I think set us apart. I think, some of those things are just that we've been around for so long. We have a lot of experience across a wide variety of project types. So it gives us a lot of flexibility, especially when you're talking about layering carbon credits, trying to incorporate multiple methodologies. We generally have experience in a lot of different areas that we can then use to leverage our geographic scope. The fact that if you are considering a biochar plant in Brazil and in the US, we have teams on the ground locally in both countries who can help support that work. So I think our geographic spread, just our long time reputation. I think at this point we're transacting somewhere around 20% of carbon credits in the VCM. So we have an incredible client portfolio that we're able to help our partners leverage and retail through, as well as a global sales team. The biochar, if you might have a biochar project in North America, but those credits can be sold anywhere in the world. And we regularly get inquiries from Europe, from Asian companies who are looking to, maybe they have a headquarters here. I think as you mentioned yesterday, a lot of clients like to focus on purchasing credits from projects in their vicinities or in near their offices, and we can help support that supply and demand at a global level. But yeah, happy to chat to you after. There's plenty more ways that kind of set us apart. But I think, when you're talking about evaluation of $1 trillion market, there's more than enough work for everybody to go around. Sometimes it just, depends on what's best for you or who you had a drink with last night at the reception. So, yeah, thanks.
I had a question. Excuse me, question. How would you advise a client with a project as to whether they should put the carbon credits that they generate in a retailer, I think was the language you were using, versus private contracts that you might help them find or that they would find otherwise? What do you see as the pros and cons there and the different outcomes?
Yeah, it's a great question. So when you're talking about selling, a lot of that, if you're talking about if you're looking for financing, then maybe a pre-purchase model would work well for you, selling directly to a client who's going to get involved in a large way early on in the project. But also when you're retailing, there are a wide variety of different solutions. We talk to a lot of biochar producers that want to retail them themselves and are approaching clients directly. You can put them on, just list them on a registry and wait for people to come to you. One of the ways that South Pole tends to set ourselves apart from our consumers is with our marketing team. So I don't know how this process works at other organizations, but with us, if you are partnering with us to retail your credits, we would work directly with you, tell the broader story behind your project. We'd craft specific marketing materials for your project, and then we'd work with our clients in a variety of different ways to help position those credits. So for us, it's very much relationship based. They're not just going up on being listed somewhere on a registry. We're actively positioning them in front of our clients. One of the things that I didn't mention, we also do a lot of client education to try to expand their focus into biochar, or educate them about what opportunities are available for biochar credits. But yeah, so we work with them to actively position them in front of clients that we know might be interested in this space. We, add them to RFPs, or, there are a wide variety of ways. But because that marketing relationship is very relationship based, you have a lot more flexibility with helping to proactively position your credits compared to some other, retailers or registry options. Does that answer your question? But again, it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. Everyone's got to choose their own path and what works best for them.
I'm going to ask one more question. Where do you see geographically the most potential for the production side of it?
Oh my gosh, that's such a great question. I think it depends a little bit on scale. We're seeing a huge interest in biochar. I mean, South America, Africa, Southeast Asia, U.S., Europe. I think geographically there's a widespread. I think then you get more narrowly down into different regions. But I think one of the great things about biochar production is you have so much flexibility with that project design, from what you're using as a feedstock to the technology that you're implementing. The project design varies a great deal, but I think there's still a lot of potential across all different regions.
All right. Thank you so much, Caitlin.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Biochar.org appreciates the support of our sponsors, exhibitors, presenters, and attendees. We look forward to seeing you at our next conference in September 2025.